The political differences between Sunnis and Shiites, of course, are what is most obvious, in some ways kind of the catalyst for the development of those two traditions. But the differences between them are bigger than just political issues. But I would say that Shiites believe that Ali, who was the cousin and the son-in-law of Muhammad, who was married to his youngest daughter, Fatima, the belief is that he should, first of all, that he should have succeeded the Prophet immediately upon his death. So in Arab culture at that time, of course, leadership, let's say, of a clan or a tribe typically went father to son. Muhammad didn't have any sons. His son-in-law was sort of the closest thing he had to a son. But also Ali was a person who the community widely recognized as a person of great accomplishment from a religious perspective. He's the first male, maybe not the first adult male, the first male to have converted to Islam, and was very close with the Prophet throughout. There's lots of tradition, sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad in Sunni tradition as well about the very particular qualities of Ali. So he was quite an extraordinary person. And there's an event that happens toward the very end of Muhammad's life. I said one of the last things that Muhammad does before he dies is to go and make pilgrimage with his community and establish the pilgrimage rites. On the way back from Mecca to Medina, and this is within the last month, basically, of Muhammad's life, on their way back, they stop at a place called Ghadir Khum, which I probably will have to write at some point on the board for you. They stop there for a moment, and Muhammad makes an announcement at that time. He calls Ali up to him, and in front of everyone who is gathered there, he raises up Ali's hand. And this tradition is in Sunni as well as in Shiite sources. And he says, for whomever I am there. The word in Arabic is maula, which has a variety of interpretations. It can mean master, it can mean heir, it can mean friend. It's, the ambiguity lies very much in that term. For whomever I am their maula, Ali is also their maula. Right? So if you consider me to be your maula, whether that's master or friend, or you should consider Ali to be that for you as well. So Shiites understand that to be a direct public nomination by Muhammad that Ali should have immediately succeeded him. When the selection is made after the Prophet passes away and everyone is gathered and Omar nominates Abu Bakr, Ali and his family are not there. Because as the family of the Prophet, it was their job to wash and prepare the body for burial. So Ali and Fatima and some other people who were related to the Prophet were not there when this decision was taken. They were preparing Muhammad for burial. When they find out, they're not happy with the decision. And Ali, although they don't rebel, but Ali withholds his bay'ah, this word. He withholds his oath of allegiance from Abu Bakr for about 6 months. After that, Fatima, his daughter, Ali's wife, Muhammad's daughter, passes away. And there's a variety of reasons that are given, but he decided to go and give his allegiance to Abu Bakr. So when the next caliph, Omar, was nominated again, Ali didn't object. When the third caliph, Uthman, was named, Ali did not object. He was part of the committee. And then finally, of course, he becomes caliph. But his caliphate is a rather tragic one. There's a civil war breaks out that basically consumes the whole 4 years of his caliphate. And in the end, he's assassinated. So that's kind of the political history, but there were many people who, even after Ali's death, remained very committed to him, loyal to him, as well as to his 2 sons, who were Muhammad's grandsons and who were very beloved to Muhammad. So eventually, over time, and it's a much longer story, my first book is about this, so if you can read that book, but over time, a position develops. The basic Shiite position is that leadership of the community belongs with a descendant of Muhammad through Ali, through his Ali and
through his daughter.
Right, through his daughter Fatima and Ali himself. So the majority, there's more than one group of Shiites, but the majority of Shiites in the world are 12 or Shiites. And they believe in a line of 12 imams that begin with Ali, his two sons, Hassan and Hussein, and then 9 descendants of Hussein. So eventually that line disappears. The last imam disappears. There's a whole theory about what happened to him. Yes, that he's in occultation, he's hiding, and eventually he'll come back. But basically, the principle from a Shiite perspective is that legitimate leadership of the community has to come from the family of the Prophet, and particularly in the line of Ali. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Whereas, as Maria had said before, for the Sunnis, it's the community that decides. And Ali was beloved because, as was mentioned, the Prophet had talked about him being like the gate to knowledge and he was very learned. And most of Sufi orders, Sunni Sufi orders, are actually, they trace their lineage back to Ali. So for them, Ali was not the political leader, but the spiritual leader.
And I guess kind of a follow-up question is that, is there any kind of like religious break? Because I mean, obviously, for example, in the Christian church, there's like, Catholics and then all the various Protestant ones. I have trouble kind of describing it to my students, like the real like religious differences between Sunni and Shia.
They're different, but it's not as distinct, let's say, as Catholicism and Protestantism, I would say, because first of all, Shiites and Sunnis read exactly the same Quran. There's no difference, and in fact, there is nothing in the Quran that would support clearly either the Sunni or the Shiite perspective on who should lead the community, which actually becomes one of the arguments for the fact that the Quran is a very early document, because it doesn't speak to these issues that were really very important for the Muslim community in those first few decades after the death of Muhammad. But they read exactly the same Quran. Their practices are very similar, so they pray slightly differently.
But even Sunnis among themselves have different schools.
Have differences, yeah. And they make Hajj together. They fast the month of Ramadan. So those kinds of things are very, very similar in terms of their practice. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow morning, so I won't get into it here. But their hadith are very different, and that has a lot to do with who they recognize as authorities within the community. But I'll talk more about that in my lecture tomorrow, if that's all right.
Kind of understand that's a big question.
Right.
But
I would say, one other thing I would say religiously is that the differences between the way these communities developed also led to kind of a difference of understanding. So like for Sunnis, those first 4 caliphs, as I said, are called the Khulafa ar-Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs. It's a kind of golden age, a period where leadership was among the people who were closest to Muhammad, who were most committed to Islam. But for Shiites, looking back at this period, this is a period of repeated betrayals. In many ways, because they view Ali as the person who really should have succeeded the Prophet. And so they really kind of look almost toward the future when this final imam who's gone into hiding will come back as a kind of messianic figure, it's called the Mahdi, to come back and sort of right the injustices that the Shiites have suffered. So it's almost a different kind of view of history as well, right? In Sunnism, you'd have sort of this glorified early period, and there's a tradition of the Prophet that says the best community is my community, and then the second best is the one after that, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. Whereas for Shiites, it's really not so much a looking back to the past as a golden age, certainly a time with the Prophet, but to the future. Yeah, so it gives a different orientation.